Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hello, Otterites. This is episode 156. I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
So, the man Alice Roosevelt Longworth once famously claimed was weaned on a pickle. Calvin Coolidge is our hero for this episode. This is another one of these where I'm not sure the other two fellas would have ever put Cal on the schedule, but I'm a big enough fan that I wanted him on the list here.
We admire him. We don't know him like you know him. You've made him your object of study. You're sitting there looking at two books about him, two biographies that we've got here. No, you're right. I probably would not have bought that, but
I certainly, once the name is brought up, I was like, oh yeah, we should do one on him.
Yep.
Absolutely, because he's underappreciated. I truly believe
he's
underappreciated.
Very much.
And I think that deserves a little bit. And that somehow comes because he ascended the office by the death of his predecessor, which sometimes that brings a little bit. I mean, that isn't always a good thing. Of course, Teddy Roosevelt did it, but so did Chester Arthur and Alexander, and Andrew Johnson. So this is not a thing.
A man like Coolidge is often overshadowed because we like action-oriented people. Are always attracted to us. He is not in that tradition. He's not a Theodore Roosevelt. He's not even a Herbert Hoover.
Thank God for that, actually. Because.
But you mentioned the books. That's a good place to start. Robert Sobel, Coolidge, An American Enigma.
Well titled. Yes.
Not a big read. Very good stuff. Another one that I think is a little deeper is Coolidge by Amity Schlaze. Who's a very modern biographer. It has a lot of praise here on the dust jacket.
What's the year on that one?
This is fairly recent.
And I know I kind of stopped you.
Because she's a fairly recent. It's 2013.
Yeah, recent enough. Yeah, within the last decade.
Yeah.
Not that Coolidge gets many new biographies that often, but it is enormously thick. Sitting here looking at the hardback, and I know it looks good on your shelf. That's got to be in depth.
Yes, it's very weighty. And it is really good stuff. She's a very good biographer. But Coolidge is, he is one of those that's kind of an accidental president.
Well, he also has the benefit of presiding over a time of great American prosperity. Now, he does have his scandals, of course, which, very rare that a president doesn't. But in many ways, I think you can overlook him because he's out of office when the Great Depression happens. He wisely did not run for another term.
And he could have.
He could have. And so he missed being blamed for the Great Depression.
So, he's a New Englander. And at that
Which
time,
we won't hold against him.
Yes, New Englanders are known for their parsimony and thriftiness and things like that. And he's very much in that old school Presbyterian, thrifty, don't waste anything, Calvinist predestination sort of tradition. He was very well balanced by his wife, Grace, who was much more of an outgoing person.
Mm-hmm.
A really, really good match, and two people who really did adore each other.
That is so often the story, not always, but so often the story for successful individuals, is they had a good spouse.
Yep.
You have a good partner in life, and you're not viewing the partnership as, well, this is to our advantage.
It's
not a partnership.
Yeah,
it's a spousal relationship.
Well, it's a partnership. It's not a union.
Well,
because we think about it theologically.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
a contract is different than a covenant.
Very much so.
Yeah,
and a partnership is a contract.
That's right.
And a marriage that is a union is a covenant.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
But he's not looking at Grace as someone that, hey, she's going to help me get elected to things. They really did view each other very warmly.
Right. She's not Hillary Clinton. No, I wouldn't be married. I'd still be married to the President of the United States if I had married that guy who's now pumping gas.
Yeah. The story of his rise is interesting. He's lieutenant governor, popularly elected, but at 1-year terms of Massachusetts. He was from
That
Vermont
was a very
to
New England thing, apparently.
Yeah, Maine had the same thing.
Kind of turned those 1 or 2 year terms. but he's very successful, and he's actually a part of the administration. He's not a figurehead. Then he runs for governor on his own, and the Boston police strike kind of makes him. He takes a decisive action. He backs the city. It's not that he's not sympathetic to organized labor. He was not just super anti-union, but he put a stake in the ground. You cannot strike against the public interest at any time. Right. This public is one of the unions cannot strike.
Yeah, that's one of the things that conservative philosophically get from Silent Cal,
that's right,
as far as unions go, is that they tend to very much be against public unions striking, as well as public unions being able to bargain with the people that they then vote and donate money to. It's a very sycophantic and
parasitic.
Symbiotic. No.
That's too nice. Yeah.
When brother and sister have sex.
Incestuous.
That's the word.
Yes, that's
it's
right.
very incestuous relationship. Yeah.
So he's very much seen nationally then as a very decisive leader, and of course the parallel is Reagan and the air traffic controller strike.
I was going to say, I was hoping you were going to go there.
He's a huge hero for Reagan.
Yeah. Reagan puts Coolidge's portrait back in the Oval Office, I think it is. And that wording, Reagan lifts that almost precisely during his statement on the air traffic controller strike. You can't strike against the public interest. A public union just cannot do that.
Right. And to be fair to the public unions, that does presuppose that those that you are, I don't want to say unionized against, but those who are employing the union members should bargain fairly.
That's correct.
That is even greater responsibility on them than it is on a private company.
Very much so. Yeah, it's just in many respects, it's not neither Reagan nor Coolidge are actually interfering in how these two sides negotiate. Except for the fact is you guys can do anything except strike.
Right.
You have to work your differences out, and you both are culpable for that, for your own mistakes and or otherwise.
Right.
But strike is not
keep working.
Strike is not an option. You have to continue working through that.
Right.
And that's kind of where we are today. I mean that it's not. I don't know that it's been tested since that time.
Probably not, but again, that incestuous relationship with public unions and those that are in power has almost become to the point where there's no point because the unions get whatever they want, or at least enough of whatever they want to where it's not been an issue. And really, probably historically, public unions have not been on strike all that often, especially compared to private unions.
Well, that's right, because as a general rule, and this is very optimistic on my part, I know that, both sides recognize the stakes. We don't have the option of striking. We've got to work this out. One way or the other, we've got to work this out.
In the public size, nobody wins when police, fire, air traffic controllers go on strike.
That's correct.
Yeah. That's the point. Nobody wins. So this is in 1919. And in these elections for Massachusetts governor, he's running on a fairly obvious platform. I mean, he stakes out a real platform during these governor and lieutenant governor elections in Massachusetts. It's fiscal conservatism, a sort of non-specific objection to prohibition, support for women's suffrage. So there's a real platform there, not just, hey, I'm a nice guy, vote for me. It's a real plan of action.
1919?
Yes, 1918, 1919.
I was going to say because, that's when women's suffrage was a huge, big deal.
Yes, and he was
for it.
He was
for
it.
Absolutely. And he was on the right side of that issue, to say.
Well, he also, again, this is after he becomes president, but, he signed the Indian Citizenship Act.
Yes.
So he was very much, in many ways, by today's standards, some would call him a liberal. Yet he is the quintessential conservative in the eyes of Reagan.
That's right, yeah. There's an irony for you on that.
Racial equality. Mm-hmm. He was not someone who wanted Klan support. I mean, Klan is big in the 20s, unfortunately.
Right, because that's the new Klan. That's not the... Again, there's the original Klan that kind of died out, but then in the 20s...
That Grant suppressed, actually.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, it wasn't a real thing as far as affecting lives like it became again in the 20s.
Yeah, they were street thugs then. They were organized by this time.
Yeah.
So he stood apart from that. But the 1920 election, it is a classic smoke-filled room kind of deal. They settle on, the party bosses settle on Harding from Ohio. They make a statement to the gathered delegates that they want Irvin Linroot of Wisconsin as the running mate. And then they kind of adjourn to figure out, well, they'll do what we tell them. Let's go get busy on something else. And the delegates balk at being,
told what to do. And Coolidge is added to the ticket kind of spontaneously. He wasn't running. I mean, he knew there was interest. He had run 6th, I think, in the delegate count at one point. Yeah.
But then suddenly, there he is. He's on the ticket with Warren G. Harding.
Mm-hmm. Harding was not exceptionally popular, though, if I recall my history.
Right?
I mean, I know, but it was...
They won handily in 1920.
Right, yeah.
People were kind of worn out.
That's what I'm going is the whole Wilsonian business, they're done with that. So as long as you put up somebody palatable,
yeah.
then they're probably going to win. And Harding was seen as that because as his administration unfolded, he was kind of one of those originals do-nothing presidents in many things.
I mean, Harding had, he wanted to put forward legislation.
Yeah.
He brought people like Mellon into the government.
Mm-hmm.
Coolidge of like Carnegie Mellon?
Yes. Andrew Mellon, Treasury Secretary. Coolidge's genius was he kept them. He kept people that were competent around.
Honestly, that is probably one of the truest signs of a good leader.
That's right.
Yeah. And his whole focus was basically that the more the government does, the more things are going to get screwed up.
Mm.
We need to trust people. They will take care of what they need to take care of. But at the same time, he was also very much a person who wanted to advance scientific interests. Radio, he's not just hands-offing things like radio and the automobile. He's promoting these as things that will change American lives for the better.
Mm. That was his lens.
Yeah, very much.
And that's one of the reasons that he's well regarded is because he's I don't want to say he's a futurist, but he's a pragmatist, recognizing he has the ability to look at these things and seeing them as with the potential they have that is not yet evident, except for during.
Yeah, I mean, even as popular as the automobile is in the 20s, as much as like the Model T and that has taken off, at that moment it is hard to see where the car goes.
Yeah, he's not going to see
where it could take us.
But not going to see it as every family not only owning one but owning multiples, which is where we are today.
Well, yeah, that's really that's really a post-60s thing.
That's right.
Yeah,
owning multiples.
That's right. And
it's really only until women enter the workforce en masse that owning multiple vehicles is a necessity.
Right.
But he's willing to let it play out, and be willing to let it see where it can go.
Recognizing that as a general rule, only good can come from this.
Yeah, and like with radio, understanding that, okay, well, if we can set a fair and level playing field, this can be revolutionary.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And he's involved in that. Now, of course, I do always like this part of the story for him, the famous silent cow.
You have to talk about that.
Yes. I think it's apocryphal. There's kind of.
It is. Yeah.
Dorothy Parker really didn't say it. He said no, that never happened. But the famous quote is: somebody comes up to him at a dinner and says, "I made a bet today that I could get more than 2 words out of you," and he replies, "You lose."
Right.
So he was not a poor public speaker by any means. He could really be persuasive as a public speaker. But privately, he was kind of a retiring New Englander. And yes, he played that up. He knew what politics. He knew how to have a persona in politics.
Right.
He knew that worked. He told somebody, I think the American people want a solemn ass as president, so I'm going to play that part. But yeah, again, that was Alice Roosevelt Longworth. When he wished he was elsewhere, he pursed his lips, folded his arms, and said nothing. He looked then precisely as though he had been weaned on a pickle.
I do love that statement. Weaned on a pickle.
That's right.
And Dorothy Parker, about hearing that Coolidge had died, reportedly remarked, "How can they tell?"
Yeah.
So again, he was naturally a reserved individual. He thought the president should be. He was playing that as a persona as well. But also, there's something very crucial. In 1924, his son died.
Mm-hmm.
The oldest son. His son had been playing tennis at the White House without socks, and his shoes gave him a blister.
Yeah.
The blister becomes infected, and of all the things, he gets sepsis and dies.
Holy crap.
For a blister
I was not
on your
aware of that
toe.
particular story.
Yes. So that profoundly affects Coolidge and his wife Grace, to the point of when you study this with the benefit of distance and what we know now about traumatic stress and things like that. He's essentially shutting down. He's got clinical depression at this point.
Of course.
He just does not bounce back. And I think it's certainly a huge factor in declining to run in 28.
Right.
His presidency is from 23 to 29.
Mm-hmm.
He's not a big Hoover fan, but okay, you could... And people were ready kind of for that man of action. And certainly at this point, there's scholarship and even some people who are pro-Coolidge. Yes, there are some things that were done in the 20s under his policies that precipitate the Depression. But we could have bounced back out of the Depression.
Right. Hoover did exactly the wrong things in trying to mitigate it.
And so did Roosevelt. I mean...
Yes, Roosevelt, people still like to credit him for bringing us out of the Depression, but it was the war that brought us out of the Depression.
Right.
It's, it's not hard to get out of a depression if you borrow a shit ton of money and direct everybody to start building stuff for the government.
Right.
That's...
Once you're done building that stuff, what do? There's nothing to go with.
Yeah.
And it's still, there was, again, not to segue off into the bad things of Roosevelt, but, even in the midst of the Depression, there was what they call a recession. I don't know how a depression can have a recession, but things still weren't going well, even with all the crap that they were doing. It just, you could only build so many government buildings and clean up so many parks. So,
only so many big time projects.
Right.
In the end, you have to have where the individual person, their wages are growing, and inflation is lower. And things like that.
Right.
But that was Coolidge. That's what he again, retaining Mellon. The idea is we're going to try to keep government spending minimized. By that method, then, we'll keep taxation minimized. We'll be able to pay off our debts from World War I, which they did.
Yeah.
And the country really did enjoy prosperity. Now, how much of that prosperity is because we'd already hoovered up everything from Europe during the war?
I think you can use hoovered up for that period yet.
You're attempting to make two things fit there together that I don't think quite work.
Well, it was an accident, We vacuumed up everything that was worth having out of Britain and France out of the war. I mean, we financed Britain and France's war effort to a huge degree. France would then turn around and finance Russia's war effort to a huge degree. And
I'm sure taking a cut along the way.
Yeah,
that's correct. Nobody does anything for free here.
So, yes, I mean, part of this is, that we had no choice but to be kind of solvent and prosperous because we had all the money anyway.
Right, and it's not unlike what happened after World War II.
Yeah.
In that when you're really the only industrialized country left standing, it's kind of hard not to be prosperous for a decade
because
after.
we were never bombed. Everybody else was.
Well, outside of a few Aleutian Islands in Hawaii.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
But there ain't no factories over there.
Yeah, that's right.
But even more in World War I, not only were we not really attacked and had our infrastructure damaged, but we really did, Britain and France mortgaged their future to us to survive the war.
Well, and also, especially England, they, and France as well, but in England, the way they fought the war, taking entire villages of conscripts and putting them all in the same battalion, and then when you lose that battalion at Verdun, you've basically destroyed the future of that village.
Yes.
And we were only in the war for a year, as far as really less than a year by the time you get troops over there.
Yeah. One summer.
Yeah,
really, exactly.
Which you could argue that do we make the difference or not? Yeah, we probably do because at least in ending it that much faster. It was probably going to end the way it did, but we helped it happen a lot faster, and certainly by providing the material and the money, we certainly did as well.
But Coolidge, I think, does deserve credit then for keeping that going, and again paying debts off. Keeping the government solvent and not heavily in debt. Keeping taxation low so that people keep what they are earning.
Well, it's very interesting because I was just looking at some of the stuff on his taxation. And you can see why Reagan was how he influenced Reagan's policies. After the Revenue Act that he got passed, only the top 2% of earners paid income tax in the U.S. That's a liberal's wet dream.
Mm-hmm.
Is for only that's going beyond just the top 1%. We've actually added the next 1% below them, and they're paying for everything. And at the time, that was anybody basically making over $100,000 a year, and that was able to fund the government and do all of this other stuff you're talking about, paying down the debt. So that was Reagan's idea. But Reagan, of course, was saddled with the progressive programs that were started under Roosevelt and then expanded under Johnson, and probably was not workable in that sense. But you can see where that philosophy came from. And he actually achieved, in many ways, what you would almost call a conservative utopia in how government was done.
Yeah. It was a limited government, and that's what he meant.
Yeah.
When he thought, okay, this is beyond what the government's supposed to be doing, sometimes to his detriment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Again, Hoover was much more of an activist. Definitely wanted the government to do more. Flooding along the Mississippi is an issue at this time.
Yes. And you could argue he's on the wrong side of that because it's not just one state involved.
Yeah.
When you get multiple states involved, in my mind, you at least need the federal government to coordinate, if not...
to at least set some standards or something.
Yeah. Well, that's what the Interstate Commerce Clause was designed for, was that very thing.
Yeah.
But he felt the government had no role, almost.
And in that case, I think he's wrong.
He's wrong, yeah.
And not just in mitigating the flooding, but you're talking about something that was for commerce that was vital to the entire U.S. up and down the Mississippi.
Yeah.
That is a federal interest, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
That's no different than Eisenhower setting up the federal interstate system.
Yeah, the interstate highway system. Yeah.
Granted, that was more for military purposes, supposedly, but
It's turned out to be the gateway for so much.
Yeah, I mean, but realistically, nobody's going to invade the U.S. anyways. So, was that really just to, as some say, well, we won't even get into that.
No, I mean, I think Eisenhower understood there were many purposes there.
Yes.
And I think he understood it was a way to stitch the country together in a method that hadn't been done before, that would relieve sectional differences.
Right.
Because
he was right on.
Yeah, I mean, even 90 years after the Civil War, there are still sectional differences in America.
Oh yeah.
And Roosevelt thought this is something where
Eisenhower.
I'm sorry. Yes, Eisenhower. I believe he did feel that would be something that you're taking and calling it I-95. You're not calling it the Florida Highway.
Right.
It really doesn't matter where it is. We're going to be able to go from wherever to wherever.
Right.
And we're going to be able to be Americans and understand
in the truest sense of the word.
Right. We're going to be able to go and be, a New Yorker's not going to feel different from a Floridian.
Right. It's what enabled snowbirds. I mean, realistically.
Very well put it.
It enables snowbirds. It's what enables the poor people in Appalachia to move to Detroit in the late 50s and 60s for work. It's what enabled the flight out of Detroit when the car companies crashed. They didn't crash, but when everything went so bad in the 70s. It enabled the movement of people to a degree that was never possible before. It enabled the ability of companies to become not just local, but national companies.
Yeah.
In ways that were never possible before. Walmart is not possible without the interstate system. So therefore, you could argue, if you really hate Walmart enough, that the interstate system is an evil thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it enables a diversification of the economy that helps make the economy more resilient.
Overall,
Yes, in a way that was not in the 20s and 30s.
Well, and
there's some truth to that.
We're a little bit rabbit hole in here, but
what it also for that, yes.
Well, we didn't do that the last couple of episodes.
But it's a defense of Coolidge. Yes, sure. When you have an economy boiling at the rate it did in the 20s and doing great in this golden age and the jazz age and all this, yes, it's got to come back down. But there's a peculiar set of circumstances that lead to the Great Depression, and it's because the sectors of the economy are so dependent on each other.
Right.
Steel industry is dependent on the railroad industry. The railroad industry is dependent on agriculture in the center of the country. When you have the Dust Bowl and you have agricultural production in the center of the country drop precipitously for a sustained period of time, then the need for new rolling stock and the need for new steel is going to drop precipitously.
Right.
And the need for coal is going to drop precipitously because the whole country's basically powered on coal at this time.
Right.
And so when all of that drops, all your investments are worthless.
Right.
Because there's nothing else to invest in.
And, it's a very complex issue.
It's complicated.
As
Trevor, he's been in the bathroom for a while, but he's here again. Yes.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yes, don't go in there for a while.
That's right, 20 minutes at least.
It's very complicated in the sense that, the stock market crash, as we have learned today, many times, especially since 1987, which is the first major stock market crash after the Depression, they really don't have to precipitate an economic downturn because it's not real losses until you sell. And sure, your stocks may be valued less and therefore your quote-unquote net worth is less, but it doesn't matter until you sell it and you need it.
Right, and back then, though, your value was directly related to your credit, and your credit was related to, again, because there's this kind of narrow industrialization that's so
more
tied.
Horizontal than vertical, you mean? Or because in many ways there was a lot of that too.
Yeah, well, it's just like I said, it's this industry depends on this industry, depends on this industry, and depends on this industry. And your credit and everything is all tied into that. So you can't expand. You can't add on. Nobody can buy your product. Whereas today, if we have a downturn in agriculture, okay, well, yeah, but that doesn't affect tech stocks.
Right.
So,
right. Well, yeah, they're
just more diverse and more resilient.
Yeah, there's more diversity in
By
what's being
definition,
made.
those are cause and effect. The more diverse you are, the more you are resilient.
Probably the credit and the borrowing which is ironic considering he was very much against that at the government level.
Yeah.
And there was probably a little bit of financial shenanigans going on in the stock market, which made a lot of those losses when a drop happens. And I don't even remember what the trigger was that caused the drop, because it's been a while since I've studied it.
Yes, I've forgotten as well.
But again, it's one of those things that didn't have to happen. But all the responses were panicked because, that's a lot of money, and a lot of influential people were in danger of losing money. So that probably forces a lot of actions that shouldn't have happened. So in a lot of ways, they went from, well, you know what, we've been doing it all this way, and it's all screwed up. So we got to do exactly the opposite now.
Yeah, that is a lot of thinking to the responses to the Great Depression is, well, we've always handled these things this way. No, we need to try something different. This is a big deal. We need to try something different. Be more activist.
Right. And, economic theory is very underdeveloped at this time. And, when John Maynard Keynes comes along, it's an attempt to make sense of things. I think he's partially right about, well, where he's right, where he's wrong, he's very wrong.
He's very wrong.
Yeah.
So, just the same with Milton Friedman, where he's very right, where he's very, same kind of thing. But because they don't really have a good understanding of these things, they kind of go off the rails in the response. I think his approach to government was phenomenal and works perfectly for the time. Probably it's not as workable, although I think Reagan made a really good shot at it.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't exactly replicate what Coolidge did because the circumstances of government and society were different.
But in using Coolidge as a model and using Eisenhower as a model, Reagan really does provide growth in the second half of the 80s. And really
from 83 on.
Yeah, from 83. There's a lot of nitpicking, but in general, the vast majority of Americans were better off in 1988 than they were in 1978.
Oh, absolutely.
They just were. And we survived an economic downturn in 91 better than we did in 1929.
Right. Well, in 87 and 91. Because people were talking about a new Great Depression was going to happen because of Black Friday in 1987 when the stock market dropped 500 points. That was about 25% of the stock market's value. That's, think about what that would look like today.
Mm-hmm.
In one day that happened. And, we survived it because people
didn't panic.
Well, they panicked,
but
they didn't approach things and do all the wrong things that Hoover did. Hoover.
I guess there's panic and then there's panic.
Well, there is. I mean, you can panic, but then end up doing the right thing, or at least not the absolute worst thing. And as we said, Hoover pretty much did the absolute worst thing. All the protectionism and the closing in on ourselves. We're at the very beginning of a globalization of the economy. And when you take that factor out, in addition to all the other shocks that the economy is going through, and it's a really bad mix. So, but again, back to what he did. When you look at what he does, he really should be studied more because, the Indian Citizenship Act is a big deal. Supporting women's suffrage is, granted that's prior to becoming president, but he's a proponent of that. Getting so many people out of paying taxes, everyday people, is a phenomenal thing. Every Republican has always been big on that. up until recently. Now we're always, more people should be paying. Well, who's your base, But anyways.
Well, it very much was, it's not just coincidence. He was someone who stood for the very average person.
Yes.
He understood the genius of the average, in that people who get up every day and go to work mean something. And that's where we should be with this government.
Right.
I mean,
that's very much in his New England background, I would say.
Yes. His famous Have Faith in Massachusetts speech, is, let's see here, I got the clip of it, and this is very famous. Do the day's work. If it be to protect the rights of the weak, whoever objects, do it. If it be to help a powerful corporation better to serve the people, whatever the opposition, do that. Expect to be called a stand-patter, but don't be a stand-patter. Expect to be called a demagogue, but don't be a demagogue. Don't hesitate to be as revolutionary as science. Don't hesitate to be as reactionary as a multiplication table. Don't expect to build up the weak by pulling down the strong. Don't hurry to legislate. Give administration a chance to catch up with the legislation.
Oh, those last two are just fantastic principles.
And that's something you should write on the bathroom mirror of everybody in the House and Senate.
Right.
So
because, they've got to justify
day.
their ability to get reelected. It's like every time there's a shooting, they want to pass more gun laws, but in just about every case, I could be wrong, but I don't think there's been more than a couple of cases where guns used in these mass shootings have been legally obtained by people in their right minds. They were always, the people who had them did not have a legal right to have them. So what happened was the laws that already on the books were broken. Now, you're never going to be able to enforce it so that no law is ever not broken. That's just impossible. Because people are people, they will find ways around it. And it's the same kind of thing. You don't have to pass another law when there's already something on the books.
Yeah.
Let the administration of the law catch up. Now, granted, the administration of the law is often unwilling or unable if they don't have the funds.
And it can be politically advantageous.
To
not enforce the law.
That can be on both sides. It can be politically advantageous for one side because you want to gin up the your side against the people who want to pass more laws.
I mean, immigration is the classic example. Nobody wants to enforce that because Democrats want new voters and the Chamber of Commerce wants cheap labor.
Yep.
It holds labor prices down.
Yep.
To let an influx of unskilled people into the country.
Right. It does. Although, beyond some very manual labor and working in restaurants and what have you that are that you can train. I mean, it's skilled. You have to have skills to do that. But those skills are easily acquired.
Yes,
is the thing. Even a bricklayer, while that's of manual labor, that's a very skilled thing. You can train people to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And much easier than you can train somebody to program a computer.
We get some sheetrock up in this place.
That's right. Hell, that's close enough. Let's just caulk it. So
get a roof on these pyramids.
That's right. That pyramid's only got 18-inch footing. We can't have that.
Yeah,
pyramid's got to have
42-inch footing on pyramid.
That's right.
So let me interrupt you, sir. I feel like I'm not doing my job here as a captain because we need to take a bourbon break.
I was just going to suggest that because I'm almost through my glass and I don't want to do that.
I am hitting some of your Heaven Hill 6-year-old bottled and bond.
Ah, excellent.
Not bad. It's got a spicy character to it.
Mm-hmm.
So not quite as refined as the 1792, but a similar profile. Spicy, kind of like a clove, almost licorice, a little bit, that kind of flavor to it. Good stuff.
Yeah. Francis, what did you...
I'm still finishing, and I need to finish it, the Heaven Hill 46.
No, the Maker's 46.
Oh, pardon me. Yeah, exactly right. The Maker's 46.
Maybe you've had too much.
No. It's a very small amount. Yes,
so I went to the Jim Beam Black.
Oh, really?
Which is a very good one. It's one of those 3 smaller bottles that I got from the kids Christmas before last. And this is the one that opened our eyes to the ice or no ice.
Indeed, that's right. I remember that.
Yes, and My Heaven Hill was on ice. That really opens up the flavor a bunch, I think.
Yep. And so, this one is one of these that it is smoother than you would think. More refined, I guess, is what you would say for a Jim Beam. Because, most people think of Jim Beam, they do not think of high-end bourbon.
Well, Hank Williams Jr. favors it, that's for sure. And I do recall he had a song about preferring his whiskey on ice and his women on fire. But that's another subject.
That's kind of hard to argue with.
That's kind of hard to argue with.
I have loved some ladies, and I have loved Jim Beam.
That's right.
They both tried to kill him in 1973.
I was going to say, this man knows his Hank Jr. song. That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, the Black Sabbath fan also knows his Hank Jr.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, we have an
walking paradox.
That's us. That is us. So it is a really good bourbon. It's a surprise, and it's a pleasant surprise when you have it, because honestly, I just didn't have high expectations when we first had it, but it's got a good flavor. It's smooth going down. It's not really in your face kind of a bourbon.
Right.
And sometimes I like that subtle flavor, and very good stuff.
Nuanced,
yeah.
we say. Yeah.
So before we move off of the bourbon break and finish up about Cal, quick toast, a quick salute to Calvin.
Yes.
I think Francis was absolutely right, and Robert, you as well. I think you both mentioned this, that he really does bear studying.
Yes.
I mean, even for someone who doesn't want to replicate the circumstances of the 20s, but it's worth studying. The U.S. was unqualifiedly a success in the 20s.
Right.
And yes, there are multiple factors
and
there.
some unique circumstances.
Yes. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just, he cut taxes so we were rich. Yes.
No, yeah.
That came relatively late in the process.
Yeah, I mean, all of the things going on with us and the credit we extended to Europe and all that, and Harding and his phrasing of returning things to normalcy. Yes, that stuff matters.
Yep.
He is on the cusp of a technological revolution, again, in transportation and communication.
Yes. Because radio is now firmly established. TV is coming.
Yeah,
telephone is becoming more ubiquitous.
And
still not everybody has one.
Right. But electrification, the automobile, these are things that are transforming the national experience. And he's right there with it. And he's very much in favor of all of it.
Right. And in many ways, he's very progressive in the positive sense of the word. In that, he's all for full participation of the entire populace in the democratic experiment.
Yeah. And he's very much, let's let people with these ideas run with them. Let's not say, Ford, your Model T is pretty good, but here's how the government would design a car. Let's see what these people can do. Let's let the genius of the average really benefit the American people.
Right. And, this is, again, remembering the context that he was in, because of the much lower level of technology that we're talking about, that level of innovation and industrialization could more easily begin by some crackpot in his barn, like a Henry Ford.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, a car, even a Model T, is still a complex machine, but all the parts are a lot easier to understand then than the parts that go into a car now.
Yep. And
because of the nature of the world and how even more interconnected we are now than even the U.S. was in its own territory back then, it's much harder. And I recognize this, and even though I don't like it, it's much harder for the federal government to take as limited a role as he had then.
Yeah.
It's not to say that he would have given that means we have to give a design for a car to a company and tell them to make it, because that's absolutely wrong. But in some ways, it's harder to get the government out of some of these roles simply because when you have things crossing state lines, that is a proper role of the government to keep an eye on those things. Unfortunately, I think we keep an eye on things that are inside state lines far too often.
Yeah.
But as we said, there are some things that he was wrong on federal government's role. And it's even worse now. It's even harder now to justify keeping the government out of some things. Partially that's because we are so interconnected and we are so much more aware. Because really, how much were people aware in California of how bad the flooding was in the Great Flood, Mississippi Flood in 1927? Today that's all over our news feeds and our phone all day long. In 1927, that would have been a couple of stories in the newspaper, in the Los Angeles Times. Beyond that...
The next day, too.
Not
the next minute, but the next day.
Yeah, just the next day, or even a couple of days, depending, because, that flood is not it happens in a split second. There's build up to it and then the ramification. Maybe you only report on it when there's 100,000 dead. I don't know. But, because when it bleeds is always true, no matter what.
Yeah,
that's right.
So, so in many ways, while I admire the approach he's taking, what he's able to accomplish, I just don't know that it could be replicated today. Some of it could, I think.
I think the mindset you could do.
Yes.
And with the understanding of, I have to work with the legislature and compromise and get to a middle course.
Yeah, I think Reagan did a fair job of that.
Yeah.
I think in some ways, he compromised too much. He was always big on, all right, we'll get the tax cuts now, which is his primary thing, and then we'll do the spending cuts later, which Congress would never give him.
Yeah.
There was only 1 year where he got not even a real, in real dollars in terms of inflation-adjusted dollars, yes, we had a cut in the budget because they kept the federal budget at exactly the same dollar levels from 1 year to the next. It's right before we hit $1 trillion. And that was a major accomplishment. And surprise, surprise, the deficit went down by a huge amount from 1 year to the next, just by spending the same amount of money, which is amazing. It just shows what happens when you can grow the economy out of debt.
Yeah.
If you don't spend it all.
Yeah, the Keynesian ideal is you spend the money because that's what keeps the economy afloat.
Right.
But you can show that even if the government restricts its spending, the economy can still grow.
Right.
Coolidge showed that. So I want to wind up because we're hitting towards the end. So listeners, Coolidge is very much worth studying. I strongly recommend the Amity Schley's book. Again, it is very in depth. Try to understand the mindset. Try to understand the context of the period. It does play a role.
Studying history, it always does.
Yeah. But I really do think he is worth emulating and understanding in that, again, we can get there again. We can be for the average person. Right. And I think that's what he tried to be. He tried to be, everything about America has always been middle class. It's a middle class revolution.
Yes.
How you have kind of defined that loosely, but it's a middle class revolution, and he wanted to bring it back to that.
Right. If you define it as, because they always like to do the quintiles, the lower 20%, next 20%, middle, and so on. If you want to define that as that middle 60%, then I'm comfortable with that. Because that's still going to hopefully help the people in the bottom 20%, and honestly, I don't care if it helps the top 20%, as long as you're helping the rest of them. Unfortunately, too much of today's thinking is, no, we got to screw over this group because that's the only way we're going to help this group.
Right. Again, I'm always opposed to the zero-sum game idea.
Right.
If I have the pizza, you aren't left with the box.
Right.
History has always
Give
shown...
me a buck, I'll give you 3 pieces, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe not 3.
History has always shown that human productivity is not limited.
That's right.
It can grow, and everybody can make their own pizzas if they try.
Or at least order their own.
Yes. So, I really like Coolidge. It's worth studying. And
Absolutely. You know, obviously, I don't think either one of us, Francis and I, did a whole lot of reading ahead of time. But I mean, you know, we were familiar with him from our own. Because honestly, we covered him in school, in college, in high school.
Yeah, and you know, we have read about him. It's
Yeah.
just not, you know, we didn't dive into it for this one.
What was the big
We
scandal
trusted
that was during his administration? Was that the Teapot Dome?
Teapot Dome was during Harding.
That was Harding.
That's kind of, you know, Coolidge steps in at a good moment and cleans all that up.
Okay, because I did associate Teapot Dome with the 20s. I just couldn't remember which part.
But it's really, Harding is he's a really hands-off guy and doesn't really, you know, meddle with this stuff. But Coolidge, he's hands-off, but he also wants a very honest administration of government. And he does clean up all of the Harding mess. And it really does not touch him. So he really is seen as a very honest and very upright guy who's trying to do the right thing for the country. And he stands off from the reemergent Klan. He's very much racial equality. He's for women's suffrage. He's opposing very kind of mildly prohibition.
Yes.
He's I mean, he
and
kind of
probably he does that on the basis that the federal government shouldn't have made it part of the Constitution.
Yeah,
is what I would guess.
Yeah, he's probably like the federal government has no role to play in keeping people from drinking. You know, if a state wants to do that, fine.
Right.
But
well, you know,
it needs to stay out of it.
There's a very good and big argument that you could make that if it takes a constitutional amendment to criminalize alcohol across the country, why doesn't it take a constitutional amendment to criminalize marijuana, cocaine, or anything like that? Because you can make an argument that they are destructive and harmful, granted to a greater degree, but in the same ways as alcohol. So, you know, it's one of those things that if it works here, or if you have to do it this way here, why don't you have to do it this way here?
Yeah.
It's one of those things where, well, we agree to just ignore that stuff. In a way, it's like we were talking about earlier. You know, if you give the government power, they're never going to give it back.
They're never going to give it back.
That's right.
Overturning prohibition is like the only time.
Right. Well, but that was not even a federal government. That was led by the populace. You know, they were done with that.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it's hard to believe that prohibition was done during the Roaring '20s. You know, it seems odd
when we made alcohol illegal, and then we had to turn right around and re-amend the Constitution to make it legal again.
Right.
Really
Well, you know,
weird.
it's one of those things. You should never give an order that you know won't be obeyed. You should never ask a question that you don't already know the answer to, especially when you're talking about politics.
Yeah.
And prohibition is one of those first things. Never give an order that won't be obeyed.
So one last salute before we go here. I meant to try to get this done during the Bourbon Break, but we have not done this yet. We said we were going to.
Yes.
So while we were here at the atrium enjoying the sun and the view,
yes. We haven't even mentioned that we're in the atrium.
we're in our
swag.
Swag here. We got our snakes and otter swag. We went to breakfast this morning in our swag.
Yep.
Did not get a comment from the server. I thought maybe he would kind of look at it and go,
I think we were kind of all hunched over our plates.
shoveling that biscuit into our pie holes.
Yeah.
But a salute to Bruce Willis.
Yes.
Word has recently come that he's going to have to retire from his acting career.
He has...
it's called aphasia.
Yes. Which is cognitive disorder.
It's not that I know a ton, but I would guess that it's akin to Parkinson's or Alzheimer's of some sort.
Right.
I mean, it sounds like it's from a head injury. You know, he famously did a ton of his own stunts, I believe.
Yeah.
You know, he's had a very action movie oriented career, man's band type career.
Oh yeah.
And it's very sad news. Very, very sad news.
It is. Very sad because, you know, some of the best, best Christmas movie ever.
Die Hard.
Amen to that.
You know, even those, the lighter film, Red and Red 2.
Oh, yeah, Red and Red 2.
Fun. Those are fun movies.
Yes, absolutely.
So, you know.
He did a lot of direct-to-video stuff in the last several probably the last 15, 20 years even. Because I occasionally will come across a Bruce Willis movie on cable or something, or one of the movie channels, streaming services that I'd never heard of before. And it's like, oh wow, I didn't even know he'd done this movie.
Yeah, I mean, he's worked pretty much continuously since Die Hard.
Right.
And he's, I would imagine that because he's worked so steadily, he must have a good reputation as someone who comes, shows up, does the work, somebody you can depend on, isn't going to call the director a prick, and move on.
Well, he's a great dramatic action and comedic actor.
Yeah.
He started out moonlighting, and also Blind Date.
Yeah, Blind Date's a fun movie.
Yeah, and they're great comedic roles. Although moonlighting is a little bit of a dramedy, first real dramedy that we can think of, but is meant more as a comedic thing. His breaking the fourth wall facial expressions in moonlighting were
classic.
Yeah,
always
classic.
that great little smirk.
Yeah,
always made you smile when you watched him on screen.
Yeah, a lot of that changed. Of course, he got very serious and tight-lipped as the action persona took more of him. You see him in later movies. He's more like the guy in Pulp Fiction than he is David Addison.
Yeah, but I mean, he could still you look at Red and Red 2. Those are just as much comedy as they are action films, and it doesn't hurt that you're starring in that with Helen Mirren and John Malkovich.
Oh, and, I mean, talk about a cast.
Yeah, and who's the fourth guy?
Morgan Freeman.
Morgan Freeman.
One,
That's
I think
right.
It is.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're in with great character actors who can disappear into a role. I mean, very few other actors disappear into a role the way John Malkovich does.
And Malkovich is just so good at that. But all of them are. Yeah. I mean, Helen Mirren is just she's a national treasure. She really is. I don't care what country you're in. She's a national treasure.
Indeed.
All right. Well, I think we've come to the end. So salute to Bruce Willis here as we leave Calvin Coolidge. So Francis, buddy, what's next time, man?
We are going to go pop culture next time. And this is something that Robert in particular wanted to go with, but I don't.
Yes, this is my month.
This is your month. That's very much so.
Good for you, man.
George Perez, the great comic book artist extraordinaire that Robert and I in particular are both fans of, but we all are. And he's got a diagnosis of cancer as we record this. Pancreatic cancer, which, as we know, the end is I don't want to say nigh or near, but
we'll talk about more in the episode.
We'll talk about more in the episode but we want to celebrate him and several of the folks that he worked with during that wonderful Bronze Age of comics that is so wonderful. So, comic book episode next time, folks. Join us.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.